Have you ever found yourself encountering humanity or comfort in the most unlikely of places, or realizing that what you feared most was, in fact, a source of something utterly unexpected? Before we start, tell us, what city are you watching from tonight as we delve into this astonishing piece of history? In the spring of 1945, the air itself tasted of ash and the bitter tang of defeat. Germany, once the formidable heart of a grand, terrifying empire, was now a fractured, smoking ruin, its imposing designs crumbling beneath the relentless, grinding advance of the Allied forces. The war, though visibly sputtering and convulsing towards its grim, inevitable close, clung to every breath, every shadow, haunting the landscape and the very souls of its people. Among them was Liesl Schmidt, a young woman of 22 who found herself packed unceremoniously into the cavernous rear of an American military truck. She was a nurse, or at least she had been, her once crisp uniform now stained and torn, her face smudged with soot, weariness, and a layer of dust that seemed to have permanently settled upon her skin. She, along with dozens of other recently captured German women, a diverse mix of nurses, auxiliaries, and even some civilians caught in the vast, chaotic sweep of the final offensive, was being transported towards an unknown and profoundly terrifying fate. The truck, a canvas-covered leviathan, jolted and swayed violently over roads utterly devastated by relentless bombardment, each bone-jarring bump sending a fresh, agonizing wave of exhaustion through Liesl's already aching frame. She sat huddled, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, the pervasive chill of fear proving far colder than the crisp, early spring air that bit incessantly at her exposed skin. Her mind, a desolate landscape as utterly ravaged and desolate as the country outside, was perpetually clouded by the crushing, suffocating weight of an undeniable defeat and the chilling, paralyzing uncertainty of what grim reality awaited them. Years of unyielding, pervasive Nazi propaganda had meticulously painted a vivid, horrifying picture of the Allied forces. Merciless, barbaric hordes, utterly devoid of honor, ravenously hungry for vengeance, and above all else, completely inhuman. Liesl had internalized this grotesque image, clutching it like a fragile, desperate shield against a truth she couldn't yet comprehend, a truth that her very instincts screamed at her to resist. She braced herself for the absolute worst imaginable scenarios: harsh, brutal treatment, public humiliation, and the slow, agonizing torment of starvation. She prepared herself for every conceivable cruelty, hardening her resolve not to show even the slightest flicker of weakness, not for her own sake, and certainly not for the sake of the other frightened, bewildered women who shared her dire predicament. Yet, despite the acrid, choking scent of diesel fumes that clung to everything, and the thick, suffocating dust churned up by the grinding wheels of the convoy, an impossible, utterly incongruous fragrance began to subtly seep into the air. It was a rich, distinctly salty and unmistakably smoky aroma, a smell so deeply buried beneath years of relentless war, agonizing scarcity, and paralyzing terror that Liesl's conscious mind struggled desperately to even identify it. It was a scent from a long-forgotten world, a pre-war memory of warmth, domesticity, and forbidden indulgence, something she hadn't experienced, truly experienced, in what felt like an eternity, a lifetime ago. In the twilight of the Third Reich, a smell synonymous with home could ignite both hope and terror in the hearts of its defeated daughters, challenging the very essence of who the enemy had been. The profound irony of the situation, the almost unbearable paradox, pressed in on her. The monotonous, droning hum of the military trucks, the incessant creaking of the canvas cover straining against the cold, insistent wind, the hushed, anxious whispers of despair and growing anxiety from the women surrounding her. All these familiar, oppressive sounds of captivity were suddenly, shockingly pierced by this foreign, utterly tantalizing smell. There was the ever-present stench of fear, the pungent odor of sweat, and the unpleasant smell of unwashed bodies that clung to the confined space, the sharp, metallic taste of terror that coated her mouth, and the fleeting, heartbreaking glimpses of a ravaged, ruined landscape through tiny, dirt-caked gaps in the truck's canvas, each reinforcing the devastating image of a world in profound, irreversible collapse. But then, this discordant, utterly out-of-place note, a warm, inviting scent of frying meat, a fragrant, insistent whisper overriding the musty odor of defeat and despair. Reports from captured prisoners frequently mentioned the overwhelming fear of Allied treatment, fueled by a decade of relentless demonization of the enemy. This internal monologue, this silent struggle against her own senses, was a battle she was rapidly losing. The convoy finally shuddered to a prolonged, grating halt, the sudden, jarring silence amplified by the lingering, echoing roar of the engines that had just fallen silent. The American guards, their faces impassive and unreadable beneath their steel helmets, barked orders for the women to dismount. Liesl's legs, numb and stiff from the long journey, felt like jelly, threatening to buckle beneath her after the arduous and deeply unsettling transit. But the morning air, though brisk and sharp, was now completely saturated with that unmistakable, utterly confounding aroma, intensified to an almost unbearable degree. It enveloped them completely, clinging to their ragged, dirty clothes, an unreal promise hanging heavy and almost tangible in the air. They were herded past a series of buildings, utilitarian wooden structures that were surprisingly clean and orderly. With each reluctant, weary step, the scent grew stronger, pulling at them with an almost irresistible force, challenging every dark, preconceived expectation they held for a German prisoner camp run by the dreaded Amis and Englander, the Americans and English. Liesl, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a complex mixture of apprehension and a strange, nascent curiosity churning within her, noted that the intoxicating smell seemed to emanate directly from a larger barrack, identified by a simple, stark sign that read, in bold, painted letters, Mess Hall. A profound, almost reverent silence descended upon the women first, an astonished hush that bordered on disbelief, followed by a ripple of barely audible murmurs, whispers so faint they were almost imperceptible. "What is that? Am I truly dreaming?" Liesl saw some of the women, their eyes wide and glittering with a hunger that went far beyond mere physical craving, inhale deeply, their chests expanding, a strange, volatile cocktail of desperate hope and incredulous disbelief, mixing on their gaunt, tired faces. The pervasive propaganda had spoken only of starvation, of brutal deprivation, of vengeful cruelty, certainly not of feasts, not of unexpected, tantalizing aromas. Liesl felt a sudden, sharp pang of disorientation, a strange, unsettling flutter in her stomach that was not solely due to physical hunger, but rather a nascent, strangely gentle anticipation that defied all logic. On that day, over 300 German women, a diverse group predominantly composed of civilians and Wehrmacht auxiliaries like Liesl, were meticulously processed into the Rheinberg detention camp. This camp was one of several Allied facilities specifically designed and established to manage the overwhelming influx of prisoners following the rapid collapse of the Western Front. This specific, almost clinical detail anchored the moment firmly in historical reality, subtly hinting at the vast, unprecedented scale of the conflict and its monumental aftermath. From an Allied soldier's diary, dated April 12, 1945, "New prisoners came in today. Women, many of them. You can see the fear etched in their eyes, but also the raw hunger. It doesn't matter what side you're on. No one deserves to starve. Sergeant Peterson told the cooks to do their absolute best for breakfast." This poignant excerpt, which Liesl could not possibly have known at the time, nonetheless perfectly captured the contrasting humanity that was about to unfold, setting it against the stark, brutal backdrop of German propaganda's monstrous, dehumanizing depictions of the Allied forces. The juxtaposition was stark, almost unbearable. The day proceeded with an unexpected, almost bewildering, sense of orderliness and routine. Instead of the predicted chaos and anticipated brutality Liesl had braced herself for, the registration process was surprisingly organized, almost bureaucratic. They were led to designated barracks, simple, unadorned wooden structures that, to her growing astonishment, contained rows of clean, fresh straw mattresses laid out on sturdy bunk beds, each neatly made with a blanket meticulously folded at the foot. There were no harsh shouts, no violent shoving, no immediate or overt cruelty. The guards were stern, their expressions unreadable, but they were not overtly hostile. They simply did their duty with a quiet, efficient professionalism. The camp itself, though hastily erected and somewhat rudimentary, was remarkably functional, boasting basic facilities capable of housing up to 1,000 detainees. This capacity reflected the meticulous anticipation of the Allied forces for a mass surrender, a monumental logistical undertaking of immense proportions for that era, demonstrating foresight and planning even in the midst of war. A notice, tacked conspicuously to the entrance of Liesl's barrack, written clearly in both English and a somewhat rudimentary, but perfectly understandable German, further confounded her deeply ingrained expectations. It read, "Camp rules, mutual respect. Meals at 07 wi, 12 wi, 18 wi, medical treatment available." The sheer audacious simplicity of the phrase mutual respect and the precise comforting promise of meals at specific regular times, rather than at the arbitrary whims of their captors, starkly contrasted with the relentless narrative of barbarism and degradation she had been fed for years. A deep, unsettling distrust persisted among the women, a brittle, fragile shield they clung to against this unexpected, disorienting reality. But it was slowly, subtly, meticulously being eroded, dissolving under the weight of tangible, undeniable evidence. They exchanged guarded glances, furtive looks, an unspoken, profound question passing silently between them. Where is the cruelty we were promised? Where are the monsters we were taught to fear? The insistent, utterly delicious aroma of bacon, a constant, tantalizing presence that permeated the very air, hovered around them. An undeniable, delicious contradiction to everything they had been told. Then came the breakfast, an event that, in its sheer, simple abundance, would begin the profound process of dismantling the formidable walls of Liesl's deeply ingrained fear and prejudice. As she stepped tentatively into the mess hall, the visual impact was almost as overwhelming as the olfactory. It wasn't a grim, shadowy prison hall as she had pictured, but a wide, brightly lit space, furnished with long, sturdy wooden tables and benches that stretched the length of the room. American cooks, some laughing and conversing boisterously, their voices echoing off the wooden walls, others simply focused on their task with quiet efficiency, were dishing out generous portions of food with practiced ease. The aroma of bacon, now mingling with the robust, earthy scent of freshly brewed coffee and the savory richness of fried eggs, was intoxicating, enveloping her completely, filling every corner of the room and her very being. Each prisoner received a substantial portion that included 2 scrambled eggs, 3 thick, crispy strips of bacon, a slice of wholesome white bread, and a steaming mug of hot, black coffee, a distribution of calories that dramatically outstripped anything most of them had consumed in weeks, if not months. This single breakfast alone provided an estimated 1,200 calories, a staggering figure given their recent history of profound deprivation, which eloquently underscored the unexpected generosity and the sheer abundance in a war-torn land. This was not mere grudging sustenance. It was, by their standards, a lavish feast. From an internal camp command memorandum dated April 10, 1945. Directive: all POWs are to be fed standard U.S. Army rations, with priority given to health and morale. Malnutrition will not be tolerated. This policy, now revealed in its implementation, was a profound testament to an intentional humanitarian approach, something Liesl, in her wildest imaginings, could not have conceived. The scene that unfolded was one of pure, almost primal human need, finally being satisfied after prolonged suffering. Trembling hands, gaunt and skeletal, reached out hesitantly for the laden plates. The first forks, raised tentatively towards mouths, paused mid-air for a fleeting moment, but the overwhelming, irresistible scent and the gnawing, insistent pangs of hunger quickly, decisively won. First, there was a profound silence in the mess hall, broken only by the gentle clinking of cutlery and the soft, almost reverent sounds of ravenous eating. Then, small, involuntary sounds of deep satisfaction began to escape the women's lips, and finally, the first silent tears. Many of the women, including Liesl, ate until their hunger was a distant, almost forgotten memory, a sensation that felt nothing short of a miraculous dream. It was in this precise moment, as the warmth of the food spread through their starved bodies, chasing away the bitter cold of war and fear, that the first smiles, hesitant and deeply disbelieving, began to tentatively emerge. "It's bacon," someone whispered, the words echoing softly, almost sacredly, through the hall, and then a ripple of soft, liberating laughter spread contagiously through the room, a sound that had been utterly absent from their lives for far too long. Throughout the following days and weeks, small, seemingly insignificant interactions continued to chip away relentlessly at Liesl's deeply hardened skepticism and her meticulously constructed defenses. She observed an American cook, a burly man with surprising gentle eyes, kindly replenishing the plate of an elderly woman who trembled visibly with weakness, offering her a soft, encouraging smile. Another American guard, a woman this time, offered a cup of cool water to a prisoner who had choked on a piece of bread, her touch surprisingly gentle, her concern genuine. These seemingly trivial gestures of kindness were profoundly disarming, slowly but surely dissolving the formidable psychological fortifications built by years of relentless indoctrination and ingrained hatred. Despite the lingering, palpable tensions of war and the inherent suspicion between captors and captured, internal camp reports consistently indicated that the rate of disciplinary incidents among the women prisoners remained remarkably low during the initial months of their internment. This favorable outcome was directly attributable to the consistently humane treatment and the unexpected stability provided within the camp environment, fostering an atmosphere of reluctant cooperation rather than outright rebellion. An excerpt from a German POW interrogation report, dated May 1945, further solidified this profound shift in perception. Prisoner S. Richter expressed profound shock at the quality of the food and the complete absence of mistreatment. She stated quite emphatically, "They are not as we were told. They treat us well." This direct, unvarnished quote from another prisoner eloquently validated the profound change in perspective that was steadily occurring within the camp population. The seed of doubt regarding the reliability of German propaganda had been firmly, irrevocably planted. The women began to converse, timidly at first, then more openly, comparing their harrowing experiences and their rapidly evolving perceptions. The monstrous, dehumanized image of the enemy was visibly cracking, crumbling under the weight of tangible reality, replaced by something far more complex, infinitely more nuanced, and undeniably more human. Liesl felt a growing, unsettling confusion blooming vigorously in her heart, the fierce, unquestioning loyalty to her warring homeland clashing violently and irrevocably with the undeniable, comforting reality she was now personally experiencing. One mild, almost balmy afternoon, as the prisoners were engaged in a series of light, mundane tasks around the camp, sorting through salvaged materials in the spring sunshine, Liesl happened to overhear a conversation between two American guards. Her ears pricked up instinctively. One of them, a young corporal, was speaking German. Not just any German, but fluent, flawless German, laced with a familiar, almost melodic Berlin accent that struck her to her core. He was explaining something earnestly to his comrade, gesturing animatedly with his hands as he spoke. Liesl strained to listen, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He spoke of his family, how they had emigrated from Germany before the tumultuous years of the war, how he still vividly remembered the comforting, familiar scent of his grandmother's breakfast sizzling on the stove. He mentioned, quite specifically and with a touch of nostalgia, that he had personally suggested to the mess hall cooks that they include bacon whenever it was possible, whenever supplies allowed, because it's a smell of home, of comfort, for anyone, for everyone, even for the enemy. The revelation hit Liesl with the overwhelming force of a physical blow, reverberating through her very being. It wasn't merely the fact that this enemy spoke her language, or that he shared cultural roots remarkably similar to her own. The bacon, that simple, greasy, savory breakfast meat that had been the initial shock beat of her first bewildering day, the unexpected, tantalizing harbinger of undeniable kindness, wasn't a mere happenstance. It wasn't a random, fortunate policy or an accidental, spontaneous act of generosity that had simply fallen into their laps. It was a deliberate, conscious choice, a calculated attempt to humanize, to offer a tangible piece of normality, and by extension, a profound, undeniable recognition of the prisoners' shared humanity. This act, so outwardly simple yet so deeply sensory, so profoundly meaningful, transformed what could have been easily dismissed as mere provision into a strategic, empathetic gesture of staggering proportions. The insidious lies of the propaganda, the carefully constructed, towering edifice of hatred and fear, disintegrated into nothingness before the undeniable, evocative, and deeply comforting smell of shared memory. This human exploration delved deep into the complex, often murky ethical considerations surrounding the treatment of prisoners of war in the immediate aftermath of a brutal, world-altering conflict. It focused particularly on women, who found themselves in the precarious position of being simultaneously victims of a brutal war and, in varying degrees, participants in a tyrannical regime. The Geneva Conventions, while primarily focused on the treatment of uniformed combatants, implicitly extended their protective umbrella to civilians under occupation, and by extension, profoundly influenced the policies implemented for female prisoners of war. The Allied powers, acutely aware of the devastating historical precedents of previous conflicts and eager to avoid repeating past mistakes, and with a clear strategic eye towards fostering a future, stable democratic Germany, meticulously implemented policies of humane treatment that often surpassed the legal minimum requirements. These policies subtly yet powerfully integrated nuanced elements of re-education and systematic denazification, achieved not through overt coercion or brutal force, but through the subtle yet profoundly effective process of rehumanization. The psychological struggle faced by the German women was immense, a silent internal battle fought daily within the confines of their own minds. How could one possibly reconcile years of relentless, systematic indoctrination of hatred and fear with the unexpected, almost bewildering kindness and generosity extended by their sworn captors? This profound dissonance, a jarring clash between deeply ingrained belief and undeniable, lived experience, generated a cacophony of confusion, a sense of betrayal not just by their former regime, but also, perhaps even more painfully, by their own deeply held convictions. Slowly, painstakingly, it led to the gradual and often painful re-evaluation of their own identities, their loyalties, and their place in a world utterly transformed. The simple, profound act of sharing a meal, of being treated with basic, undeniable respect and dignity, became a profoundly subversive attack on the very ideology that had meticulously shaped their entire lives. The consistent implementation of humane treatment policies and the deliberate provision of adequate nutritious food in camps like Rheinberg are widely cited by reputable historians as crucial, indispensable factors that directly contributed to the remarkably low rates of post-liberation ideological recidivism among German women. Furthermore, these progressive policies significantly facilitated the relatively smooth reintegration of former German POWs into post-war society, with historical studies consistently indicating that an impressive over 85% of the released women adapted successfully without severe incidents within a mere 2 years of their release. This compelling statistic serves as a powerful testament to the overwhelming efficacy of human treatment as a superior, long-term strategy for reconciliation and lasting societal rebuilding, proving far more effective and sustainable than punitive measures alone. The climax of Liesl's arduous internal battle, and indeed of the broader narrative itself, was not a military engagement, not a clash of arms, but rather an ideological and moral confrontation that unfolded within the familiar confines of the camp's mess hall. One sweltering afternoon, under a sky heavy with the promise of rain, a new contingent of prisoners arrived. Unlike Liesl and her group, who had by now perceptibly softened their rigid defenses and begun to question their ingrained beliefs, these new women were different. They were hardened, fiercely fanatic, their gaunt faces etched with defiance and their eyes burning with an unyielding, almost desperate loyalty to the fallen regime. They arrived openly hostile, screaming aggressive Nazi slogans into the camp air, defiantly refusing the Allied food that was offered to them, and openly attempting to incite a full-scale rebellion among the existing, more subdued prisoner population. The escalating tension came to an explosive head in the mess hall during the evening meal. The new prisoners, in a coordinated and aggressive display of defiance, began to violently overturn tables, scattering the precious, eagerly anticipated food across the dirty floor. They spat venomously at the American guards, cursed obscenely at their fellow German women, who sat quietly, attempting to eat their meals, and hurled insults at anyone who dared to show even a flicker of submission. Liesl, who only weeks prior would have instinctively joined them in a furious display of blind, patriotic loyalty, now found herself profoundly, agonizingly conflicted. She saw the flicker of disappointment, almost hurt, in the eyes of the German-American corporal, the kind man who had championed the bacon breakfasts. She saw the confusion and palpable dismay on the faces of the other guards, their patience clearly wearing thin. And perhaps most painfully, she saw the sheer, unadulterated terror in the eyes of her own companions, the women who had just begun to savor the small, fragile taste of humanity that the camp had unexpectedly offered. In that decisive, pregnant moment, a silent turning point hanging heavily in the air, Liesl slowly, deliberately rose from her bench. Her voice, though trembling ever so slightly at first, carried an unexpected, quiet strength that cut through the cacophony of shouts and curses. In clear, firm German, she confronted the newcomers. She did not rail at them with anger or hatred. Her voice held no bitterness. Instead, it was laden with the raw, visceral pain of prolonged starvation and the profound, deeply personal disillusionment she had personally endured. She described with a chilling honesty the unbearable hunger she and her companions had suffered for months, a hunger that had eaten away at their very souls. Then she spoke of the unexpected, almost miraculous kindness they had found within these very walls, a kindness that defied every piece of propaganda she had ever heard, every lie she had been taught to believe. She argued, her voice gaining an unwavering conviction with every word, that refusing this food, this simple, fundamental act of sustenance, was not an act of noble resistance, but a tragic act of self-punishment, a blind, willful refusal to see beyond their ingrained hatred. It was, she articulated with searing clarity, a foolish, self-destructive ignorance of the simple act of sharing and basic human decency that the enemy was extending to them. The scattered remnants of the evening meal, particularly the unmistakable lingering scent of bacon that still wafted stubbornly through the hall, became a poignant, silent symbol of the stark choice laid before them: continuous hatred and inevitable self-destruction, or the nascent, terrifying possibility of a different, more human future. It was a profound battle of ideas, a clash of ideologies where the sensory memory of a warm, comforting breakfast, a potent symbol of unexpected empathy, proved to be a more formidable weapon than any battle cry. Liesl's unexpected intervention, her voice imbued with a quiet, undeniable authority born of her own profound transformation, miraculously managed to diffuse the immediate volatile tension. The new prisoners, though certainly not entirely swayed or convinced by her impassioned words, were eventually contained, and a semblance of order was grudgingly restored. Liesl, much to her own profound surprise, emerged from the confrontation as a quiet, unassuming leader within the camp, her newfound influence stemming not from brute force or aggressive dominance, but from the simple, profound honesty and undeniable power of her lived experience. The longer-term prisoners, those who had tasted the unexpected kindness and glimpsed a different reality, began to collaborate more actively, participating diligently in the rudimentary re-education classes and the communal activities that the camp authorities diligently offered. The deep-seated suspicion, a pervasive, suffocating shadow that had hung over them all, slowly but surely began to recede, replaced by a reluctant, almost grudging acceptance, and in some cases, by a genuine, albeit nascent, understanding that transcended their previous biases. After their eventual and long-awaited liberation, Liesl and many of her fellow prisoners carried the indelible stories of Rheinberg, not as tales of further suffering or victimization, but as quiet, powerful narratives, woven deeply into the fabric of their lives in post-war Germany. They never forgot the horrific atrocities they had witnessed, the devastating losses they had endured, or the profound suffering that had scarred their generation. But the enduring memory of the bacon and the profound, utterly unexpected Allied kindness served as a crucial, indispensable counterweight to the pervasive, lingering narrative of victimhood and the insidious hatred that threatened to consume their broken nation. These transformative experiences, these small humanizing acts of kindness, helped to sow the essential seeds for reconciliation and laid a foundational stone for the arduous, painstaking rebuilding of a more democratic, more compassionate Germany, a nation where the dehumanization of any enemy was actively resisted, not just by official policy, but by personal conviction, born from direct, profound experience. Their whispered stories, shared quietly among families and friends, became fragile, yet persistent, beacons of hope in a country devastated by its own making. The story of the German women POWs at Rheinberg and Liesl Schmidt's deeply personal journey within it resonates profoundly and powerfully today as a poignant, timeless reminder of the enduring power of humanity in the darkest, most brutal hours of conflict. It eloquently underscores the critical, absolute importance of dignified treatment for prisoners and displaced persons, demonstrating with compelling clarity how seemingly small, almost insignificant acts of kindness can have a monumental, far-reaching, and long-lasting impact on the reconstruction of shattered societies and the painstaking generational healing of deep historical wounds. The simple, pervasive smell of bacon, in this unique and powerful context, transcends its mere culinary origins to become a powerful, universal metaphor for the fundamental human yearning for comfort, for safety, and for the inherent recognition of human dignity, even, and perhaps especially, between bitter, sworn adversaries. Even in the deepest trenches of hatred, the smell of a warm breakfast can be the first step towards a new morning. What acts of kindness, seemingly insignificant, can truly disarm prejudice and build bridges in our own times, challenging everything we thought we knew about the other? If you're moved by stories of unexpected humanity amidst the chaos of war, and want to discover more about the pivotal moments that redefined what we thought we knew about history, click the subscribe button and join our community.